Good afternoon, everyone. Hello and welcome to our other webinar in our series of the Science of Reading webinars. I'm Yevgen Borodin, the CEO of CAPTI, and I'll be your host and facilitator. So today we'll focus on developing word recognition and decoding beyond grade 3. Most of the lesson learners are assumed to have mastered these skills, and research finds that significant number of students in middle and even high schools are lacking in these skills. So we hope that today you will not only learn a few new facts about word recognition and decoding and methods for developing these skills, but also walk away with determination to implement them in your classroom, school, or district. This webinar is sponsored by CAPTI, which helps assess, accommodate, and advance reading. Next slide. All right, without any further ado, introducing Dr. Margaret Opatz, who's the reading research scientist at CAPTI, and take it away, Margaret.
Great, thank you. All right, so today we're really going to focus on improving word recognition and decoding for students who are beyond K3, where that's really the focus. So we'll take a look at how we can support older students. With most conversations in reading today, we will start by contextualizing it through the science of reading and the research that really informs how we should be teaching reading. We'll look specifically at the word recognition strands, and then we'll dig a little deeper into decoding and word recognition in the upper grades, with a really clear focus on how it differs from the elementary grades or those primary grades. We'll go through some instructional practices, and then we'll finish up by looking at how we can measure word recognition and decoding, especially for older students. So, as I mentioned, the science of reading is everywhere right now. And one of the most common heuristics that we see for the science of reading is Scarborough's reading rope. And I think this is a really good illustration of what skilled reading takes, especially when we look at each of the individual strands and how we really have to weave those all together to be able to produce skilled reading. So this is also a good representation because it shows us that literacy is much more than just being able to comprehend the text. So often, or I should say previously, it was just very common to assess just comprehension, but not really know what was causing any of the comprehension difficulties. Sorry, I just got distracted by the chat, but I'll let somebody else address that. So by looking at the science of reading through Scarborough's reading rope, we can really see this visual representation of what it takes to be a skilled reader. And throughout today, we're really going to focus on this word recognition, the strands that comprise word recognition, because these are crucial in being able to decode the meaning from the words on the page that then leads to strong reading comprehension or skilled reading comprehension. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look into these strands. So when we're talking about the word recognition strands, we're talking about phonological awareness. And unless you are a primary teacher or elementary school teacher, you probably don't have training in this, but this is really being able to identify and manipulate those units of oral language. So this would be like parts like words, syllables, the onsets, and rhymes. Then that's like that foundational skill. The next point is to be able to decode. So it's this ability to apply the sound to letter correspondence to accurately or correctly pronounce the written words. Once you're able to decode, you're then able to build up your sight recognition. So you can see a word and just automatically know what it says without having to take any of your cognitive processes to be able to sound it out. You just automatically know. And we know that from research that literate adults have this sight word memory ranging from 30,000 to 70,000 words. And this is really an important stage to get to because if we're stuck in the stage of having to sound out each word, it takes up all of our cognitive resources. So we can't put the emphasis into comprehending what we're actually reading because it's taking so much effort to just sound out the words. So these word recognition strands are really important because English does not have a one-to-one orthography. There are languages that have this one-to-one orthography. English is not one of them. Finnish does, but it's really important to note that we don't have the one-to-one orthography. And we can see this when we look at the number of letters, which we have 26 letters in English. And then there are 44 phonemes. So that means we have like way more sounds than letters. So students have to know that there are 20 different vowel sounds. And they also have to know that there are 24 consonant sounds. And then they have to be able to take those vowel sounds and those consonant sounds and be able to decode various words. So when we think about the ability of decoding, what this is it's simply put, it's the act of deciphering a new word by sounding it out. So you see the word on the page and you can sound out the letters within the word. It is also the ability to really be able to systematically sound out the words based on the sounds and the letters, and then pronounce these new words. So when we think about decoding, it's really important to get to this stage where we can understand the relationship between the sounds and the letters, because once students can independently decode, they can actually increase their own knowledge of words, because they can start to more quickly decode new words that they didn't know before. And then it builds into this pattern of success where we're decoding unknown words. And then over time, those are becoming automatically known words, or those automatic sight words. And then once readers do know those combinations, and they're able to decode all sorts of unfamiliar words. So when we think about decoding, it's often talked about as phonics instruction. And I think that there's one key point here in terms of looking at it above grade 3. Phonics instruction is very successful when it is systematic and explicit. So in any phonics research, you're going to see these two words. And I think we can bring in these two words and the concepts behind them to really support readers in these upper grades. So when we think about systematic instruction, that means that it's a planned, logical sequence of instructional activities where we're really focusing on the most useful phonic elements. And that would be the sound to letter correspondence. And then explicit means that we're teaching in this very direct and structured way, and we're telling students what we want them to know, and then we're going to model it for them. I think it's really an important note here that Joe Torgerson points out that explicit instruction does not leave anything to chance. And that is really important, especially if you are an older student who's struggling with decoding. It is imperative that you get exactly what you need to break the code and then be able to increase the words that you automatically know based off of your ability to decode these unknown words. So decoding in the upper grades looks different from the lower grades, but it's really important to point out that as students are going through upper elementary and then into secondary school, they need different strategies to decode multisyllabic words that they encounter. And these are everywhere within the text, starting at 5th grade and up. Multisyllabic words are very frequent, and students need to have specific skills in place to be able to decode these much bigger and longer words. I want to share this really important piece of research that really highlights the significance of decoding for the secondary students. And I even lump upper elementary in there because I think once we hit fourth grade, it's very rare for teachers to be giving a specific decoding intervention, even when students are showing that that's what they really need. So I'm sharing this research here, and researchers from ETS found that there is a decoding threshold. And this actually came from the assessment that I'll demo later on. But the researchers found through hundreds of thousands of administrations that there's this decoding threshold. And what that means is that this red line on the screen, students who were below this red line, you can see it's flat. And this is the correlation to reading comprehension. So they found that for students who were decoding below this specific threshold, that there was no correlation to comprehension. And this is a really important finding for older students because it tells us that students require explicit decoding instruction, but once you're beyond fourth grade, it's rare that you'll actually get a specific decoding intervention, even though that's what students need. So very often teachers will focus, and at no fault of their own, they'll focus on like fluency or comprehension, but miss that decoding piece. And if they are below this decoding threshold, you could be supporting them in tons of different comprehension strategies, but they will not be able to increase their comprehension until their decoding skills are remediated. And of note, once students get beyond this decoding threshold, there is a positive correlation between your ability to decode and your ability to comprehend. So that's a really important piece of data that we can rely on to suggest that students in these upper elementary and secondary schools need more instruction in decoding, especially when they're showing signs of needing that support. So for older students, it definitely looks different. I think it's easy for me to imagine seeing students sitting on the floor learning phonics in those elementary school classrooms, but decoding definitely looks different for older students. So going back to this decoding threshold, I think it's important for us to provide this decoding instruction to older readers who have demonstrated a need, and we'll go through now what that kind of looks like. So specifically, researchers have found that this poorly developed word recognition, all of these skills, may be the most incapacitating source of reading challenges. So being able to decode is imperative for older students because it really limits their ability to read successfully. And then it's also important to note that researchers have found that just focusing on one skill in isolation isn't as effective as really pulling in this multi-component intervention. So where you're focusing on more than just that one skill. So within decoding, you wouldn't just want to focus on just the sound to letter correspondence. You also want to pull in some repeated readings or fluency, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So now I kind of want to just take a second and say, like, let's look at what this really means. So here are the specific practices that upper grade students need for decoding. So we should teach word analysis, and that should be explicit and systematic. It should start with syllable types. It should also go into the syllabication rules. You should have isolated analysis where students are working just with one word, but then you should also be pulling in this context embedded analysis through passage reading. We also need to actively support students in building their automatic word recognition. So we can do this by giving students lists of words to read and timing them and helping them get faster at reading those words. We should also do timed fluency reads where we have a passage and we have students reread that passage multiple times to increase their automatic word recognition. So now we'll dig a little bit deeper into each of these categories. So we'll start with teaching word analysis. So at the very foundation, students need to know what a syllable is. And when we think about a syllable, they have to know what a syllable is. And then they also have to be able to tell you that like a word like goblin has 2 syllables. Beyond that, so knowing that it's goblin and it's 2 syllables, if they're going to do any analysis, they have to know that a syllable must have a vowel, and then it can have this initial and final consonant as well. But it could also just be a vowel. When we talk about syllable types, students need to know the 6 syllable types. So they need to know that cat is a closed syllable. They also need to know the rules that go into the syllables. So in a closed syllable, the vowel will always say its short sound. So in cat, A says ah, the short sound. They also need to know the open syllable where there is a vowel, but it's not closed in by a consonant, and it says the long sound. So in go, O says O. They also need to know vowel consonant E, and that A will say the long sound. And then in R controlled, the R is actually going to control the vowel and make it in star, it says R, which is not the common pronunciation of A. So they have to know that R works a little bit differently with the vowel. They also need to know the consonant LE and the vowel team. Consonant LE means that anytime that there's an LE at the end, there's going to be a consonant before it that comprises that syllable. And then a vowel team is any 2 syllable or any 2 vowels working together. So in boat, OA says O. So once students know the syllable types, it's really important. You can move pretty quickly with students to, especially when they're older, to understand those syllables. But then we have to do something more with it. We can't just say, okay, they know the syllable types, they're good to go. For decoding at the secondary level, we really have to rely on the syllable division rules to support students in being able to break apart these multisyllabic words into syllables, rely on the syllable rules, and then be able to produce the words. So I won't go into depth into each of these, but like specifically for rule 1, let's just take a look at that one. So students should be taught that if there are 2 consonants between 2 vowels, so in this case, we have A and I, and then we have the consonants P and K. We divide between those, we usually divide right between those 2 consonants. So then students would be able to break this down into nap and kin, and then go back to the syllable types and the rules of the syllables to be able to say, okay, in a closed syllable, A says ah. So that very first syllable says nap. And then they can do the same thing for the second syllable as well. So by being able to rely on these syllable division rules, students will be able to go more into decoding these multisyllabic words and actually make sense of them. And this is a really powerful tool because once students can start to break words into syllables and decode them, they can start to increase their word recognition, but also their reading vocabulary, because often our oral vocabulary knowledge greatly exceeds our reading vocabulary knowledge. So there are 6 common division rules. I'm going to leave it at that. So now I want to show you what it would look like to do some isolated word analysis. I just talked through a little bit of those syllable division rules. So in this word, for instance, students would be able to determine that there are 2 vowels separated by 2 consonants. And then they would be able to say, okay, we will separate the syllables between the T and the N, and this becomes catnip. The same thing would be true here. They would be able to look at this and see that we have a vowel team and a blend in the word. and then they would be able to determine that this is coastline. This becomes really powerful once students have a little bit more knowledge of language. So this next word, they could actually start to use their knowledge of affixes to say, okay, bi, by, means two. And then they would be able to determine the syllable divisions and determine that the word is bifurcate. Maybe they have no idea what bifurcate means, but if they have knowledge of the morpheme bi, meaning two, they might be able to get close to the meaning of the word. And for bifurcate, it means forks or divides into two branches. So they would have a little bit of support in being able to determine the word meaning once they're able to break the word into syllables. So that's really a focus on that isolated word analysis. We also want to do this in context. So when we do this in context, I am suggesting that we pull in a passage and use the reading passage, hopefully from content, to really be able to support students in building their decoding of these bigger multisyllabic words. So specifically, I've pulled in, this is the 5th grade text. And here what would happen is we would have this passage and the teacher would identify the words in a passage that are truly required for students to fully grasp the meaning of the text. So you're reading through and you're saying, okay, if students don't understand what a volcano is or what an eruption is, this is going to be a really difficult text for them to understand. And then the teacher would point to the specific words. So I have these highlighted here. It would point to the specific word and say, do you know this word? And then if students don't know it, they can go back into exactly what we're just talking about, the syllable division rules and the syllable types. And then they can start to break those into syllables and then decode the word syllable by syllable and then consolidate the word by reading it quickly. Then the next step would be to do this with all of the selected words. So you repeat it until you go through your selected words. And that brings up the question of which words would we select? So I want to give a little bit of guidance on this. The yellow words are these tier 3 words, which are topic or discipline specific. But we shouldn't only focus on tier 3. We should also focus on those tier 2 general academic words as well. So what I did here is I used an academic word highlighter from the EAP Foundation. So I just took the text, put it into this highlighter, and it highlights the words from the academic word list. There's only one on this page. This is just a small snippet of the entire text. There were more on the other pages, but it shows you exactly which words are tier 2. And these are those really high utility words that go across multiple disciplines and are imperative for students to know to be successful in reading. So those are the types of words that should be selected. I'll show you, here's the actual academic word list highlighter. You can see the other words that were highlighted as well. So that's what we should really be doing, is supporting students in this context embedded phase where we're giving them a passage, highlighting some of the imperative words that they know, seeing if they know them, and then giving them skills to break down the word into those syllables to be able to decode accurately. And then over time, that will build up their automatic word recognition. And that leads me into building this automatic word recognition. So when we think about this, the first thing we can do is timed list reads. And I don't think this is a very common practice outside of intervention, but what that would look like is students are given a word list, and this one is graded as an 8th grade word list. So these are common words from the 8th grade textbooks. So these are also coming from the tier 2 words. So just like that academic word list that I highlighted that I just showed, that's where these are coming from as well. And when I mentioned that these are timed, what you can do is have students read it, read the list. They're going to stop and divide the words into syllables that they don't know. And then over time, they're going to keep timing, record the number of errors, see how long it takes them to read the list. And then over time, they will improve their accuracy of the words, and they'll get quicker, so that now they know all of these words and they're building up their automatic word list understanding, or automatic sight words. So that's one way to do it. There's also another way that you could do this as well. So I did mention I mentioned that specific list, and here's why we want to do it. Once students have knowledge of specific words, they can start to take those words and then transfer them to other to other words as well. So if they're in the same word family, they're going to be able to make that connection across words and then start to make sense of more and more words. And this actually comes from the idea of phonograms, which are taught in the primary grades. So K2 does a lot of teaching of phonograms. So that a phonogram is a series of letters that stand for a specific sound. They don't stand for a specific meaning. So for instance, we have UNK, which would say unk. So once primary school students know unk is what UNK says, they know sunk, bunk, trunk, skunk, and shrunk. Now, that doesn't have anything to do with the meaning, but the sound, it makes the same sound in each of the words. So they're expanding their ability to recognize the words in that way. So this is really helpful because in the primary grades, K2, there are about 500 words that are represented by very few phonograms. So this next strategy that I'm going to show you will feed off of this idea of building phonograms. So I'm going to push us into more of this morphemes, understanding morphemes, because once students know a morpheme, they're going to start seeing it in all of these other words and be able to automatically recognize those words. And we can do this because English is a morphophonemic language. So that means that there's the spelling system, and the spelling system represents both meaning and sound. So once you know the meaning of like MENT, meant, which is a morpheme, but once you know the meaning of that, then students will be able to start seeing it across words and just automatically recognize that one part of the word. So what I'm suggesting here is that instead of focusing on phonograms for secondary students, we're going to focus on that academic vocabulary and specifically on root words and affixes, and this will increase automatic word recognition. So my suggestion would be to use Cox-Head's academic word list and use this as a list to really support students in being able to read quickly all of these academic words. So by using there's at the top here, she has like the family of words that are all from Analyze, and she is from Australia, so she has the S here instead of Z, but you could easily change that. So once students are able to read each of the words on the list, they are expanding their knowledge of the words that they know automatically. It just increases exponentially. So you can see that if students just focused on the family of interpret, they would know all of these words and be able to read them quickly. And then also by reading all of these words, they're going to get into the meaning as well. So then they're gaining more meaning into what each of these words means. And these are words that they're most likely seeing in their grade level texts. So this all comes from Cox-Head's academic word list, and you can see the various word families. She actually lists them in a sublist from 1 to 10, and it starts with the most frequent, and then it goes to the most infrequent academic word lists. Okay, so then moving on from a word list, now we can go into timed fluency reads, but this is a specific caveat to it. This is a focus on building automatic word recognition. So I would still build in the previous note where I showed you highlighting the specific words in a text and then having students read those. This would also rely on doing that type of practice. But here's what you would do for the timed fluency reads. So for this procedure, you would select a passage that's 100 to 300 words, and it can come from a bigger text. So the text that I'm showing you here, you could expect that students are just reading the first part of the passage, but there's more text involved later on in the passage. Then you're going to mark the number of words line by line. I assumed when I made this that students would get beyond this first paragraph. So I went just this whole first paragraph, that's all 52 words. So you want to mark the number of words so that students know what they get to, because then what they're going to do is they're going to read this passage for 1 minute, and they're just going to time themselves for 1 minute, and then they're going to do this 3 to 5 times. But the focus is on increasing the number of correct words read per minute. So that also means that there needs to be some error correction, and it should be done through explicit feedback. So this should be a teacher, or there may be a peer who is able to also provide feedback. But the feedback should be giving the correct pronunciation of the missed word. And we should be really careful to just give that feedback. So if they missed cattle, saying, oh, you missed this word, the word is cattle. And then students should say it back. Well, what's the word? Cattle. Then you can even say, okay, go back to the beginning of the sentence and read that whole first phrase up until the comma. And they go back and they say, for a cattle herder in Africa. And they make sure that they're saying cattle correctly. You could also have them sound out the word by breaking it into the syllable types. But during this, it's more efficient to just give them the word because the focus really on it is on that fluency reading. So I've found it to be just more effective just to give the word. But I do mention that just give the word to students instead of saying, you said, and then whatever they said. When we do that, especially for struggling readers, it gets in their head and it starts to cement in the inaccurate pronunciation. So by just giving the correct pronunciation, we're actually going to help reduce the misconception of the word, because when we do give them the other word, it starts to create this, was it that way or was it cattle? So we want to just clarify it and just give them the correct pronunciation. And then to really help build growth over time, or to promote growth over time and build motivation, we should use charts that students can do on their own, and they can see this growth over time. So what that might look like, I'm pulling this from the University of Utah's Reading Clinic, this type of chart. It would look like students doing the repeated reading at the University of Utah. The Reading Clinic does 4 repeated readings, but you want to be able to help students see that they are improving over time. This increases their self-efficacy, and then it's also increasing their motivation because they see that they do have the power to improve over time. So you can see how the student charts here, they record the number of words that they read, they record the story and the level, and then they're also recording their errors. So we want to see a decrease in errors and an increase in the words read per minute. Errors are really important here. You can see like this student here had 2 errors still, or 1 error and then 1 error. Like whatever that word is, it's going to be really important to like note that they're still struggling with this one specific word. And you can do a little bit more digging to like figure out what is it that's causing the issue, and take that word and have them break it down into the syllables. What do the syllables say? And then consolidate the reading of the word to say it quickly, and have them keep practicing that so that they can increase their automatic recognition of that word. Something that came to mind specifically with AI is that you could actually have something like ChatGPT rewrite a passage and have it include the specific words that you're working on. So if you have students reading that list, like interpretation or analyze, all of the words from that use analyze, you can actually have it insert those words into a text. Probably not all of the words, but you could include the words that you're specifically focusing on in order to support students in building up their recognition of the words. Because sometimes, especially with those less frequent words on the academic word list, you may not see those in a text like very often. So if I were including the word bifurcation, I don't think that's a very common word to see in a text, but I might ask ChatGPT to insert it. A 5th grade teacher that I work closely with, he did this for a description of a U.S. senator, and he had it use specific academic vocabulary within the text because he wanted students to get access to those specific words. And ChatGPT did it and did a pretty good job with it. So now we've discussed really like looking at word recognition and decoding for upper elementary and secondary students. And now I want to take you into read basics, which can be used to measure word recognition and decoding, especially for students in the upper elementary and secondary grades. So I'm going to take us on a little demo here of read basics. I'm at captivevoice.com, and now I'm going to log in. Okay, so now I'm at I'm in the dashboard in the user interface, and what I want to show you is for CAPT Assess, I'm going to read basics, and we can focus on just word recognition and decoding. And that decoding threshold that I shared about before, that came from this assessment. So it came from the subtest of word recognition and decoding. CAPT Assess with Read Basics is normed for grades 3 to 12. So this is a really good assessment that you can give to determine whether or not students in the upper elementary and secondary grades are struggling with word recognition and decoding. There are other sub-skills here that can be assessed as well. But if you just wanted to test word recognition and decoding, it would take 8 minutes. You can put in the grade. So if I was at a 7th grade level, I could put that in. So now I'm going to show you what the reports look like, specifically if students took word recognition and decoding. So I'm going into the reports into classes, and I have a 7th grade class here. So within my 7th grade class, there are 26 students. You can see how students did on the scale score. So the scale goes, or the proficiency levels are weak, low average, high average, and strong. Of specific significance for students within this is students who are at the weak performance in the word recognition and decoding are below that decoding threshold. So because I am talking about word recognition and decoding, I really want to focus on that. So I clicked on the students tab here, and I can see how students are doing in word recognition and decoding. Specifically, this is a 7th grade class. So if I sort by word recognition and decoding, I'm going to see how students did within that subtest. And I see that I have quite a few students who are falling at or below that threshold. So this means that their ability to decode is not influencing or correlating to their ability to comprehend. And then you can see the rest of the students here, how they did. But that is of specific significance. So if I were to look at Brooks, and I look at his results, I see he was at 210. This means that at a 7th grade level, he's really going to struggle to succeed in skilled reading, especially at grade level, because his ability to decode is impairing his ability to comprehend. I can see his lexile, and then I can also see how he did across the year on his word recognition and decoding. So then I can also look at his recommendations and see what is it that he should be doing. And it should be no surprise, but he should be doing exactly what we were just talking about, really focusing on the syllable types, being able to know that sound to letter correspondence, and then being able to break down the syllables into their specific, or sorry, they should be able to break down multisyllabic words into syllables and then be able to decode those syllables to produce the full word. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you there. I think it is important for you to also see what the word recognition and decoding subtest, what the items actually look like. So I'm going to do that next. So give me just a second here to resize this. Okay. So as far as what it looks like, the word recognition and decoding subtest, it looks different than an elementary school phonics assessment. So there are 3 types of items, and they're used to measure a student's ability to recognize sight words and then to also decode nonsense words. So specifically, we use real words, such as car, nonsense words, and pseudo homophones, which is a fancy way of saying words that, when sounded out, sound just like a real word. So we have these 3 item types. So the real words are selected to cover a wide range of words. So the test design includes the kinds of words that would be in content area textbooks throughout school curricula. The non-words are selected and they cover a range of spelling and morphological patterns. And then the pseudo homophones are these non-words. And like I mentioned, when they are produced, they sound exactly like real English words. And this measures their ability to decode unfamiliar words without relying on their orthographic representation. So the last item type, the pseudo homophones, are really unique because what it's trying to do is determine if a student is able to pronounce these words without relying on their spelling. So let me show you a couple of examples. So here's a real word. So the word is place, and students would just select number 1 or is a real word. Number 2 says dut, and that's not a real word. It doesn't sound like a real word. But then this final one is blue. So you can't rely on the orthographic or spelling representation. You have to sound it out. And when you sound out blue, it does sound exactly like a real word. So this is really measuring students' ability to sound out words without being able to just rely on what they've known for years to be the specific spelling. Okay, so now let's see. Yevgen, I'm going to pass it back to you before we do questions and answers.
Thank you. Read Basics is available as part of the CAPTI literacy solution, which helps assess, accommodate, and accelerate reading. Next slide.
Oops.
And it could be implemented with a variety of different systems. CAPTI integrates with Schoology and Canvas, and Clever, and Google Classroom, and ClassLink is coming next school year. Next slide. And we also provide professional development training and free basic product training, unlimited. Usually it takes 30 to 90 minutes on how to use the assessment. And then we have paid PD to help teachers be more effective by telling them when, who, how to assess, and what to do with the results of the assessment. And then Margaret does data review meetings and provides additional training. Next slide. So if you'd like to ask for a free trial, please reach out to Erica. She is here with us, I think, in this webinar. She'll set you up with a free trial. So you can do this probably for the summer school or in the beginning of the school year, whatever works.